Thanks, everybody. Let's get started with this.
So, welcome to the Sports Betting Hub and Spoke panel. This is a topic that personally is dear to my heart because I'm working with several tribes, including Choctaw, Prairie Band, Potawatomi up in Milwaukee, and Desert Diamond in Arizona. And I know that they touched on it a little bit in the panel before about what Hub and Spoke is, but for those who are less familiar with what it is, and because it has far-reaching implications, basically it's an alternative to legislation to get sports wagering legalized in a particular state. And what Hard Rock has done is nothing short of brilliant in that they've said to the governor of Florida, we're going to amend our compact, which needed state ratification, but we're going to amend our compact because what happens in Florida pertains to Florida. It's not interstate wagering. And so long as the hub, which is the technology, is on tribal land, the device, the mobile device, the player's mobile device acts as a spoke, and therefore the wagering takes place on tribal land. And the implications of this are far-reaching in that it really does disrupt the way that sports betting has been deployed to date, meaning a FanDuel or DraftKings or an MGM will go, let's just use Connecticut as an example, because it's a good one, in that DraftKings asked for the NIGC to give a declination letter, opine on a legal opinion that they can do this because the NIGC has specific regulations that you cannot do certain things in order for it to be permitted. And one is allow someone else to make decisions for you, and the other one is to pay someone 30, with exception, 40% of your revenue. That is prohibited, and the NIGC will opine on that. And that obviously doesn't work for a FanDuel or market access partnership. And so the ability to have this hub and spoke has actually leveled the playing field for the tribes to actually do this themselves without feeling pressured to sell their license. So that being said, I did hear a rumor that might be challenged a little bit. I'm trying to get, apparently there's a declination letter that was issued. If anyone knows, please share with me that one of the two big operators might have gotten a declination letter that their market access partnership is not violating a management contract. So I found that out yesterday. So it's all kind of real time. So what's important here with Chris and Prairie Band, and I want him to share the process, is that Prairie Band, before the Department of Interior issued their opinion that the West Flagler, that what Hard Rock had done is okay, their tribe started the process to be the second tribe to amend their compact. So it's not just a one-off anymore. So I'd love to hear from Chris a little bit about what the process was, when you got started, what some of the challenges were through the process.
A lot. Anytime you're negotiating with the state, it's a lot. And so we launched our brick and mortar sports book in January, which is the worst time to do it, especially with the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl. So that said, a lot of hard work that goes into that stuff. And so Chairman and Tribal Council with our attorneys, negotiated that in our compact that we will follow the hub and spoke, but we will not do mobile sports wagering until West Flagler is no longer appealable. Well, it's still appealable with the Supreme Court and there's another one in the Florida Supreme Court. So we're impatiently waiting for those decisions to be made and getting those agreements in place so when we are allowed to do mobile sports wagering, we'll be ready for it. There's no timeline on these things, so that's the really frustrating part. So it could be, next week, it could be next year. Supreme Court said they correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember the term, but basically they weren't going to make a decision on it when at the West Flagler Supreme Court decision, the en banc decision.
En banc.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but anyway, that we're waiting for that, for all of those to be decided before we can launch our mobile sports book. But I also want to touch on declination letters. And when we were in the final stages with our provider, it was encouraged. They encouraged us to not do a declination letter because who knows how long that takes. So we chose not to get a declination letter. Some tribes absolutely will do it. It's just going to take time and hold up your launch date.
Right. So, I mean, what the declination letter period is? It could be 9 months.
However long they want to take.
And the NIGC also said that they don't want to opine on sports betting. Is that true?
That was my understanding that they didn't want to make that decision, but it depends on what attorney at the NIGC gets your contract and what their, I don't want to say what their mood is, but I could give it to different attorneys at NIGC and they'll all have a different opinion on how these agreements are written. So that's frustrating. There's no consistency with it.
Yeah. And so how do you plan in advance, not knowing if this will get settled tomorrow, in 6 months, in 9 months, or in 5 years? Like, how do you plan for that?
We just have to have our agreements signed, and knowing that there's no clarity of when we'll launch, and there's so many different agreements for mobile sports betting, and having to set ourselves apart going so late into the game. What are we going to be doing differently than the big ones are doing? We're a tribal operator. We don't have the marketing funds, and we can't be giving $1,000 deposit bonuses or like that's very tough for a small tribal operator. We took the risk to do a B2B sports book, which made sense for us. Smaller tribes that are challenged that don't have mobile, they're going to have to do a B2C model, and if you don't look past the upfront money that some of these providers are going to give, it's very scary, and you're going to get put into a long-term agreement with probably not a great partner. So
is your advice then to seriously consider selling the license? I mean, I would have thought that you can't do that with the hub and spoke model because the management agreements don't work.
Very intricate, in my opinion, because of the rev share. It doesn't make sense for one of the big ones to come in and do the 60-40 rev share if it's not going to violate the management agreement.
Right.
So there's those intricacies with doing that, selling your license. And I said at the previous panel, our tribe made it clear that they're not going to do a revenue share with the state. We're not going to. That would be our path right now. But the tribal council, we're absolutely not doing a rev share with the state. So we'll sit back and wait for what's likely to be decided before we go mobile.
It's interesting because there's another tribe that I'm working with that's trying to come up with their strategy on how to approach the governor, because it's all dependent on getting the governor to agree to this. So if you don't have a good relationship with your governor, then that's an issue up front. But their strategy has been they are going to pay a state, some kind of share. And that was one of the big reasons that they think that the governor will agree to this, because if they had gone down legislative route and it requires a constitutional amendment, then it would take 3 years. But a compact route will take 6 months. Well, whenever Hard Rock is completed.
Right. And that process is such a long process, and going back and forth with attorneys and the time, I like to move fast on things, and I'm at the mercy of, tribal council and chairman working with the governor's chief of staff and whether the state gaming in Kansas has oversight over that piece of it. They kind of do, that's for the regulators to decide, but it's such a complex, sports betting is so complex in Indian country. Look at what does it look like for Oklahoma or Texas, or it's so complex. So when we're looking at these agreements, what's the goal going to be? Is it just mobile on-prem? Is it just bricks and mortar without a mobile? Depends on the population. So every tribe and every jurisdiction is going to be so different when they decide to go with sports betting.
It's interesting. So, but in your Kansas regulation state, didn't it mention the tribes getting a license?
It did, but they spoke out of both sides of their mouths. If you guys get time, if you think about it, the way that sports betting was approved in Kansas was disgusting, and making comments about, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but there's comments in there like this lawmaker had to have his assistant grab him a cigar because he was over the amount of the donation or the scotch and that stuff, and that's how it was approved in Kansas. So we have a good relationship with the governor, and Kansas is very unique in it not being political when I say this, with a Republican governor or a Democratic governor and a Republican attorney general. We were in the middle of an election, and it worked out where we were able to proceed with how we started because the governor was reelected. So all of these things play a part of the compact renegotiation, or the state saying we're on a level playing field with the state-owned casinos, and we absolutely were not, because we had to renegotiate our compact. So it's lies, honestly. They didn't put us on a level playing field, and here we were a year and a half before we launched, and the state was already running, and we launched in January, which again was a terrible time, but we had to get going.
It's not the first time the tribes were not treated equal, and I feel like for those who understand what went on in Arizona, the tribes were definitely put at a competitive disadvantage in that there were 20 licenses available, and 10 went to tribes and 10 went to sports teams. However, there were 23 tribes, 7 of which signed a compact to be able to offer sports wagering, and there were only 8 professional teams. So, why they felt that they could get away with, 1-to-1 is beyond me, and it was very unfair. What actually became really unfair was that if you were FanDuel or DraftKings, you were doing a deal with a sports team because you're definitely getting that license. But if you went and did a deal with a tribe, well, there was a good chance that you weren't going to be able to offer it, because 7 of the tribes who applied for a sports betting license didn't get one, and their partners, or like Desert Diamond did it themselves, or their partners had to write a 100-page narrative on why they deserved it, and it was unfair, because they didn't find out until 3 days before the state went live, the tribes, that they got this. So they were totally unprepared. They launched 6 months late compared to if you did a deal with a sports team, mm-hmm. And so it's unfortunate to be seeing this time and time again. And I do question states like Minnesota, right, which could go down the compact route, keep the teams out, and instead of going down the legislative route and then bring the teams in, which is what they're doing. And I kind of feel like, unbeknownst to them, they're putting themselves at a competitive disadvantage when they can just put the brakes on and say, let's see how this thing at Hard Rock plays out. What do you think the timing for the Hard Rock thing is? The people that I'm working with are hoping the summer.
I'm hopeful before the next football season, and even though just to speak a little bit about Minnesota, it's such a delicate. I know Minnesota's here. The tribes working together and either getting it or not getting it. The card clubs want to be involved, like everybody wants to be involved. But if you're north of Minneapolis and St. Paul, you're very challenged with population, and so for those tribes, it's important for hub and spoke and to be able to do statewide mobile with that model.
And that brings up another question, right, which is the concept of making the playing field more equal for these different types of tribes. Some are located in much better locations, and then setting up these funds almost kind of like what they do in California as an effort to say, hey, if you're going to opt not to do this, then we'll give you a percentage of our revenue to equalize it. I don't know, have you in Minnesota, from what you know, have they talked about that? I heard they were talking about that in California.
I know it was talked about, and I'm not up to speed on Minnesota specifically on that topic. I heard grumblings of that, but I'm unsure of what that's going to look like. But you look at, off topic a little bit, Missouri and Kansas were fighting for who's going to get sports betting first. Well, Missouri legalized recreational marijuana, and they made $1.4 billion in revenue last year. What did Kansas make? Maybe $100,000 in tax revenue. And Minnesota tribes have the cannabis, and they're starting to do great things with that. And sports betting is important, but you need to look at using the regulations to their advantage too. And they're going to make more money on that than sports betting at the end of the day. So what's more important?
No, I get it.
And it's an amenity. Sports betting is an amenity, and you should absolutely not expect to make money on it right away, especially if you're challenged. Or for us, we're retail only. It's very, very challenging, and we really have to be careful of the spend.
So how, knowing you have to be up, I'd say, before Hard Rock at some point, right? Just for mobile on premise.
Mm-hmm.
Does that change your decision for the Class 2 mobile on premise? Do those two decisions become a little bit more inextricably linked?
Depends on if we're talking about the wallet, yes.
Right.
You need one wallet. It's so clunky to have two wallets, and there's some, there's a good provider for wallet for Class 2, and there's a good wallet for mobile sports betting. And it's a hard decision because personally, you have to take your personal feelings out of it because they're great companies, and I would love to do it. But at the end of the day, what's the best journey for the player? And it's the one wallet. It does go hand in hand, in my opinion. Mobile on-prem, but not mobile sportsbook on-prem for us. It does not make sense, financial sense.
Right.
That's very tough, and with the cost of it and all the marketing spend, it's not worth it to launch just on our reservation.
And your reservation expands where?
So our population of our reservation is about 1,200, and it just doesn't. It doesn't. No sense at all to do it. We'll lose so much money doing it.
Does anyone have questions? I want to just open this up to the audience. No? I'm trying to think about if you were giving advice to other tribes who want to get this done, what would your advice be?
There's so many different providers. There's very small. It depends, and it depends on what you want. What do you want to do?
I mean, the compacting, like the process to start the compacting amendment. Like, how do you get it started? Do you start with your governor?
It's hard for me to speak on that piece because you have to work with the governor. You have to work with the governor's chief of staff, and you have to work together to see what you want. But then you have to also present it to the lawmakers, and they have to vote to approve it. And if they don't like it, then you're back to the drawing board and renegotiating or outlining what you want. So every tribe is different in that aspect.
Did you guys have to go and renegotiate at all?
Yes. Well, we just no, because our compact is solid where we don't do the revenue share with the state. So we just made that sports betting from being prohibited to permitted. And that was just an easy change. No revenue share. They didn't ask for it, nor should they. But at the end of the day, it was an easy change.
And what about the other tribes in the state? Have they put forth this, like an amendment? Have you heard about any other tribes? Like, are they angry that you did it and they didn't?
No. So there's 4 tribal casinos and there's 4 commercial casinos in Kansas where our location is the best. All of them are very challenged, very, very low population. There's a casino on the Nebraska border, or a tribe on the Nebraska border, that they were partnering with a B2C route, which those 3 tribes have to do a B2C route. I think that deal went through. They're so challenged. I don't know if they could afford to do it, and that's unfortunate. But our gaming commissions all work together. They meet quarterly, and there is a good relationship with the tribes in Kansas. One in particular, I know absolutely they cannot do it. They can't afford it. So even with the B2C route, they shouldn't do it, in my opinion. But again, there's so many different providers out there, that from the big ones to small ones that are up and coming, that I think there's value to those. And when people ask my opinion, what works for us, or what should we do, and what's the goal? Are you gonna try to make money on it right away, or are you adding it as an amenity? There's so many different things to consider when making that decision.
Have other tribes come to you asking for advice about how to start this process on compacting at all?
Because I'm not involved with that, not the compact piece, but definitely providers, our I don't want to say wins and losses, but our successes and failures. The learning from those failures, and it's helpful for me. Of course, we have to learn something from them, and then we have to share our knowledge. And
Right.
and I'm always encourage people to reach out for questions or feedback, whether it's operators or there's one tribe that I was talking with that their council is pushing for a B2B route, and they can't do that. That they can't afford it, but council's not educated on what that looks like, and making decisions without being educated, they're dangerous. Especially what I mentioned earlier, when you're presented with all this upfront money, we'll build out this beautiful sports book. Well, a tribe that doesn't do very well, they have to look past that and get a good consultant and get a good partner and look past the upfront. You have to look past the upfront money.
Interesting.
I have a question, actually. Sorry.
Yeah.
So,
We'll allow one.
I feel like we're turning on.
yeah, so I'm just thinking about what you guys are talking about. I'm just thinking about California because it's a mess. Because besides the tribes, you have the racing industry, you've got commercial card rooms, you've got the state lottery, and a few years ago it was Proposition 26, 27, and at CNIGA, meeting after meeting was, we are not renegotiating our compacts, we're never paying taxes. And then somebody kind of came up with this unpopular idea of well, you shouldn't have to pay, but what if you offered to pay 2 or 3%? Would they get rid of all of these other interests? And now we've come kind of full circle. Every tribe in California is looking at Seminoles, so looking at this hub and spoke. And you're right, you do have the tribes in Northern California with very little population that are well, we need to sell our license to a larger operator. Okay, well, we're not going to do that. And so there is that big argument. Do we set up this fund? But even the ones in Southern California are still, when you start talking about renegotiating the compact, there is some dissent amongst them. So I guess the question really is how do you really approach that conversation with the tribal governments?
Internally.
Yeah.
Did you have a lot of resistance?
Yeah.
Right, from renegotiating, because I know it is a taboo subject, renegotiating compacts. They're going to take something from it. That is the immediate feeling.
So people think when you are renegotiating the compact that you're opening up your compact, and that's not true. So that's a dangerous assumption to make when you're not educated on that. So it's important to educate. But for us specifically, we had our general council meeting had to approve to do the amendment and just changing the word from prohibited to permitted, or however the language was, and not pursuing hub and spoke until West Flagler was decided. So we actually, when the general council meeting happened, we encouraged our team members who could vote we let them off to go vote if we could afford to, but it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. But it's educating our tribal members on what this actually means, and what, for me as the operator, it's not appropriate for me to educate on government things. I can speak to it, but just educating our team on what sports betting looks like. And we had so many of our guests that were supportive, and just, when are you going live? When are you going to go live? And we, NCAA is coming up, and we're behind the 8 ball on that. But our watch party, what are you doing watch party? So we're putting that together. We're almost done with that. But it's education. You have to educate whomever, whether it's me educating the GM, who educates our board, and the board educates council, and council educates, that's a telephone game. But you have to do it right.
Yeah.
And I've been in some of those tribal council and board meetings, and I got beat up a few times, to be honest. And it was some tough conversations, but it's educating, and that's the biggest part of it is education, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You had a question?
Yeah, it was a quick question. I think there's a lot of discussion, obviously, on what's going on in Florida, and a lot of people are watching that intently. And I think, it's like one situation where you have a tribe that has a very strong digital gaming arm that is ready to offer B2C on its own and a meter partner and everything like that. Is there concern that if this becomes the model, though, that in states, especially states where you have not one big tribe, but a plethora of tribes throughout there, that basically you're forcing tribes into doing it themselves because they won't be able to find major partners who will agree to give up 70% of the revenue to partner with them. And so now they take on costs and debt to build out an arm and then never recoup the cost and debt of it because they are no longer given the option of taking the low risk. Okay, fine, you do everything, I'll get 10%, I'm not making a lot of money off of it, but I have zero risk in it, versus now I have to take on all this risk and leverage just to be able to enter the marketplace, and I don't know how it's going to play out.
That was what we were up against. All of those, the big ones were taken, and what's left. And no offense to the smaller ones, they weren't. It wasn't the right opportunity for us. And I like there's a lot of great small providers out there. That's what we came up against. I was trying to reach out, and nobody would return an email or nobody would return a call because before they launched, it didn't say who their partners were. So that was really frustrating for us when we were looking at both B2B and B2C. What's left? We'll do B2B our own. We'll do our own. And so that is an important comment that you made because you have to get in it early, and those providers are all probably taken, and that's unfortunate for the smaller tribes who don't know that, who are in front of it.
And it's interesting that you phrased it that way. I hadn't really thought of it that way, like more like the forcing, because these guidelines that were put forth by the NIGC are there to protect the tribe so that someone doesn't come along and take too much revenue, right? Where it's their license and so it's interesting that it's not forcing them because they don't have to do it, right? You can just keep it to retail. Mobile is more expensive, there's no doubt. But what I find the trade-off of forcing is that you can launch something pretty cost effectively, and because the FanDuels and DraftKings aren't in there, you don't feel this need to be giving these huge bonuses away, spending like crazy to get your name out there in sports betting. You can do more like the Arkansas model, which is the way effectively that Arkansas, even though it's not tribal, but the way they set it up, saying you have to give 51% to a local partner. That's effectively like a management agreement. Therefore, all the casinos kept it themselves. And look, on one hand, you don't see the revenue levels. Per capita is the same in Arkansas, right? But you don't see them losing money. They're probably all making money because they're not overspending in marketing. They're not over bonusing and promoting. So you can do it fairly cost effectively. It's this pressure from these other aggressive sports books that put that extra pressure on you as the local casino operator to have to spend. Like the way we felt with Desert Diamond, that we needed to spend more in order to get our message out there.
And for us too, real quick, we know that we're not going to compete with them, and we're marketing it as we're the only local sports book. We're the only tribal-owned sports book in Kansas, and that's how we're marketing it. We're not doing any bonusing right now. We're not even connected to loyalty. It was just get it going. So that will come later. But I know we're out of time. But you just have to know that you're not going to make those numbers, and we're okay with that.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, Chris,
for
sharing your thoughts and your experience with it, because it is revolutionary and it's really interesting times.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.